All right, good morning, everybody. Welcome to our Coffee and Compliance webinar series. I'm super excited to have Diane Rosseter of Georgia Pacific with us today, talking about probably our mutual favorite topic, water permits, and everything about stormwater, wastewater, processed water. So really appreciate you being here today with us, Diane.
Thank you, Ryan. I'm looking forward to it. I appreciate it.
Sorry, before we get started, maybe if you could give everybody like just an overview of your role at Georgia Pacific, what you focus on.
Okay, sure. Yeah, so I'm within our compliance, or I'm sorry, we have what's called our continuous manufacturing group, and I'm a director in that group focusing on environmental compliance, specifically around water and waste issues. So I support multiple facilities with any type of water or waste issue that they may have. So that's a big, just period. It's a lot.
Just all water and waste issues, everything that comes up. What's the in continuous manufacturing? What does that mean? Because I know I first working with you and other folks in GP, like understanding. A lot of us think of Georgia Pacific around paper products, lumber products. What is continuous manufacturing? What's the type of facilities maybe that you encounter water issues on?
Yeah, for continuous manufacturing, it includes all of our large pulp and paper mills, of which we have many across the country. We have another group called the discrete manufacturing group, and those would be our plywood, our wood products facilities, our corrugated facilities. We work across platforms with one another, so we help each other out. We're not isolated into a silo. I just happen to sit in a chair within the continuous manufacturing group with the larger facilities.
So mainly paper, pulp mills, yeah. So large, complicated processed water.
Yeah.
What are their typical permit structure look like on one of those from a water aspect? Are they running all like wastewater, stormwater? Is it a combined permit? Are they separate? Do they have other like drinking water, processed water? What is the landscape?
All the above. All the above. We have every type of scenario that you just indicated. We have some of our large facilities that will have rolled all their stormwater outfalls into their wastewater permit, so they only have one permit. Or in another case, we have a very large facility that has an individual permit from a wastewater standpoint, but they have one stormwater outfall that is in that permit because because an operation that takes place in that one particular area, and then they have a general stormwater permit for the rest of their outfalls in the facility. So some facilities may have only one, some may have two, some may have three or four. So if they have like a cooling water discharge or utility water discharge that can't be covered under either permit, they may have a separate permit for that as well. And we also have drinking water permits at several of our facilities.
Just to throw it on top of other permits.
Yeah, a little bit.
Yeah, I guess with that, how do you typically get involved with facilities and their water permits? What's your interaction with a facility like a paper mill?
Yeah, well, it kind of depends on the facility, but typically, I mean, pretty much on many levels. I mean, anything from helping to interpret permit conditions, especially, some of our permits are pretty detailed. I know everybody's are, but some of the ones in particular, like Florida, for example, has a lot of detailed language in it, and just trying to help interpret what some of those conditions are and how they actually apply. Also, from a permit renewal standpoint, working with the facilities for pre-planning, making sure that we're in communication with the regulators if we need to be. Working through the analytical list, especially, EPA's recently changed their Form 2C, and they dropped a few analytes and they reorganized the form a little bit. So it's really kind of helping the facilities navigate that, and also from an analytical planning standpoint, because if you're running that whole full gambit of Form 2C, analytes takes a lot of planning and a lot of coordination. So helping get organized with that, and especially if they have multiple outfalls, that have multiple lists and varying lists of what need to be analyzed for. Also, assessing and troubleshooting compliance issues, working with the facility if we're going to look at maybe asking for a reduction in a certain frequency or a change in parameter. So again, it just kind of runs the gambit. Every situation's a little bit different, but we seem to be going through quite a few renewals right now, so it's really a lot of the pre-planning, and then interfacing with the regulators as they have questions once they get our permit applications. So.
Yeah, so and you're acting as an internal technical expert
Yeah.
to the facilities and working with an environmental manager at the mill to go to the regulators to analyze the data.
Yeah.
And how many different plants are you like helping out in a given, say, month? How much are you jumping around? All of them at once?
It depends. It kind of comes and goes. Like there are some states that haven't been too good about keeping up with the 5-year permit renewal cycle. Several of those, as a matter of fact. We have a few also that are administratively extended for various reasons. But right now we're kind of in a little bit of a heavy cycle where we've got a couple that are in, we're ready to get drafts. Some we just recently received drafts, and a couple where we're in the process of preparing the application. So I'd say probably there's usually 4 to 6 in some level of either renewal or soon to be renewed or review at any given time. So.
Yeah. And as part of that, you're looking at like historical sampling data, looking at process, industrial activities, and then figuring out what you need to apply for.
Yeah, yeah.
What do you see as kind of the top 2 or 3 challenges, whether with Georgia Pacific facilities or even just more broadly in the industry with stormwater, wastewater permit compliance? I mean, where do you see? I know we've done presentations together and talked about like here's the top 3 things to look out for, but has that changed, or what do you see?
Well, I think it has a little bit. I mean, I think we've got a little bit of an ever-changing landscape right now. I mean, for a variety of reasons, world reasons, you know, things we have going on in this country, just the pandemic has really changed priorities for folks and changed staffing structures. And so I think I think there's always been a lot of moving parts, but I just think there are more now. You know, there's been a lot of turnover in both industry and with the regulatory community. You know, some long-term folks have decided to leave the business because, you know, seek a better lifestyle or seek a more, you know, and it's just one of those things. And it's not unique, I think, to any business in particular. I think it's just, that is sort of the landscape right now. It's just, there's a lot of turnover. So you have new folks coming in, trying to learn a facility, trying to learn the idiosyncrasies of that. And then also from the regulatory standpoint, newer regulators who aren't as seasoned and understand some of the idiosyncrasies again around industry and what is maybe unique to pulp and paper versus what may be unique to mining, and but there are differences. So I think that's a big one. Also, I'm going to say emerging issues and emerging contaminants. There's a lot going on in that space right now as well. So how that figures into permits, you know, that's a cycle. It's going to cycle into them, but it is something that really we need to be cognizant of as we're you know, planning for renewals or just staying on top of those things. So
yeah, I mean, we haven't talked about those 2 issues a lot, say 2-3 years ago. Like,
yeah,
we always knew that there was plant level changeover, but at the scale we're seeing today and understanding how the handoff on processes, procedures, just the basic compliance of like, this is what you need to do to comply with this water permit.
Yeah.
In that, I think it's interesting your comment about like the regulated community too, is it's not just on the industrial level, it's re-educating kind of I mean, depending on your point of view, your adversary or your partner on the regulatory side of like, what is it that we do here, and you know, how are you regulating us? So I think it's an interesting point of like that workforce changeover is impacting everybody, not just at the facility level, but the regulator community too.
Yeah, and it's interesting. We've seen a difference in how inspections are conducted. You know, folks are traveling more, but we've had you know, a request at one facility for a virtual inspection, and the records they wanted to be gathered and to be placed in an area somewhere for them to access virtually was tremendous. I mean, it's one thing to have someone coming into your facility and being able to pull things as they need them and hand them to you, but it's interesting to have a virtual inspection. So.
Yeah, what was the scale of that request? Like, was it 5 years of records? Like, how?
It was several years, and it was an extensive list of different things, and a lot of which were you know, only on a shelf, not necessarily available electronically, because it was, you know, or available electronically in pieces. So it was, I think it was probably 3 years, I'm going to say, something like that. So
Yeah, we're seeing that more and more. I mean, it's why we're in the software business of like,
yeah.
how do we make that as easy as possible? What do you see companies doing kind of like, how do they set themselves up for success? I mean, one of it is just ensuring you have records.
Mhm.
Where do you see companies setting up for success? What are they investing in today?
I think streamlined systems where you know, where everything can talk to one another, like all your different systems you have out in the processes, where you have your wastewater system, whatever you're using to gather data, that those systems can communicate with one another, and how that translates then into, you know, your documentation and your monitoring and recording results and your record keeping, and then your reporting. So I think anything that you can do to not have multiple places that data is being stored or data is being gathered, you know, and if you can figure out a way to marry all of that together, I think that is really huge. I think another thing that is big is thinking about training. And when you think about training, you need to think about training not in the short term, but from the long haul for success. Because I think where you see things get lost in translation is, you know, it's that, you know, passing on that knowledge from one person to the next, and things get missed. And I think that having good systems in place and having good SOPs, O&M manuals, things that are truly useful, that's not just a space taker on a shelf or on your computer or your hard drive or whatever, that someone who's new, who can come in, if they don't have the benefit of the operator that's been running the system for 25 years, that knowledge is captured somewhere. So it's not just a say, oh, here's what you need to go do. It's a here's what you need to go do, why, and what the implications are. I think that's huge.
How much have you seen the role of like yourself, other environmental people shift from, you know, if you have a good system in place, have you seen that role shift to where you can do that kind of number 2 item with the training and the coaching and like spending more time? Have you been able to spend more time? Have people been able to spend more time training up the new workforce that's coming in, like in working on like problem solving, if you have a good system in place for all the kind of routine stuff?
It's a work in progress. I
Yeah.
mean, literally, it is at the moment, it is truly a work in progress. So I think we're getting there. I think folks are getting there. I think it's kind of a bear to take on, especially when you're looking at multimedia. So I think if you can get it good in one area, then trying to take that and translate that to so if you succeed in air, how can you translate those learnings to water, and how can you translate those learnings to waste? So
Yeah.
I think we're getting there though.
Yeah. What are you seeing the most successful programs do today? Like what is, if you were to design or from your experience, perfectly successful environmental program, what does that look like? And is the unicorn, does that exist? Like the perfect program?
If I were to walk in right now and look at a program, and I would want to see something that's well organized, that is well understood. I mean, these are like, I know these are like fluffy things I'm saying, but and well managed. And I've seen that with folks. When you walk into a facility and they are anxious to tell you about, here's what I've done to really get my compliance program in order. And it, like I said, and you're just walking around going, wow, this is great. It does come down to, you know, my alter ego is, I mean, I love data, and I love the cleanliness of data, how you can take such an ugly mess of it and organize it and make it into something streamlined, or into something that makes sense. So that's how I combat I hate to vacuum and I hate to dust and do, you know, my clutter back here. But I think that if someone can take that and apply that to their compliance program, and know that a well-organized and a well-run and a well-managed compliance program, you can have all the other systems in the world in place, that you've got to start with those basics. of knowing, knowing what's going into those bigger systems. You've got to have a grip on that and understanding why it matters and what the outcome, what the potential outcome is, what you're trying to accomplish. So.
Yeah. How do you get there? Like, what are you seeing as like ways to get there at a facility level or even at a programmatic level?
Yeah. I think getting people the tools that they need to be able to do that. I think that's a key thing. And I know, again, that sounds like a little bit of a fluffy answer, but it's helping, it's identifying those tools and then helping them get what they need and listening to them, listening to the folks at the facilities, what they're, what keeps them up at night, and what do they feel like they need to be able to accomplish that. And so the other thing we're, to look at too is then how to harmonize that across a company so that we don't have 14 different systems that people are using. Let's find one or two that work really well, and then let's harmonize that across the board so that people can support one another. They can get support from their corporate resources, their internal resources, and then also be able to feel empowered that they're learning something that they can translate to help other folks as well.
Yeah. Do you see more of that like ownership expertise from compliance, call it systems and systems more than software, but just systems of like that? Do you see that culture? I mean, is that the most resilient kind of part of the compliance culture? Like, do you see that replicated where somebody's really like bought into the system and then able to translate that and go elsewhere to other facilities and other people?
I think we're still getting there too. Yeah, and I think part of it too is that you've got to have your team be, it's not just the people at the mill. It's not just the people that are trying to, from a corporate level or a business level, trying to get this going, but it's also the people who your vendors, really, like your laboratories, your consulting firms, whoever you're going to be getting your data from, your information from. They're also stakeholders in that process. So I think that it's that having that communication and level of understanding with them so they can know how to help work with us to help us succeed, and therefore helping themselves succeed too. And like I said, I think that's something we're still working on, but I feel like we're getting there. So yeah,
I mean, some of the biggest parts where I learn is like working with great laboratories on like how to understand the nuances of analytical data and what it means for labs, and getting that consistent flow going. I mean, they can be the best asset you have around like water permit sampling and analysis, is understanding why they're doing it that way. What are the other opportunities? It's also interesting. I've encountered it when you mentioned like the emerging contaminants. I've found like labs is one of the best assets for understanding like what is it on emerging contaminants? What are the like, what's kind of new science for the analytical methods? Like, because they're emerging contaminants, we might not really, there's a lot of variability in how we measure them. So you're right about the like partners. They can really help you on some of those big problems that are coming down.
Yeah, and they really can. I mean, and that's the key. We've been following a few things specifically through some of our laboratories that we're using. But the other thing is they're also your eyes and ears around your samples. So we collect samples, we send them in to the lab to be analyzed. So if you start seeing results that are a little weird and you're trying to put that picture together, to me they can be a valued partner with that. Don't just, if you call the lab, ask questions and say, hey, we got these crazy results. Can you tell me anything that you observed about my sample? Because when it leaves your hands, it may look one way, but by the time it gets to the lab, it may look totally different, especially if you have like iron bacteria going on, or there's been some kind of wonky relationship or interaction with the preservative in your sample. And the lab may say, hey, yeah, there was a layer of such and such in your sample that I'm not used to seeing before. And we might not have seen it when we collected them at the time. So I think they're also our eyes and ears as well. And we should never be afraid to ask them questions.
Yeah, I've experienced that. It's something as simple as like a TSS sample. Then they're saying, well, there's this giant chunk of a leaf in there that, really skewed your results on when we filtered it out. It's you you just treat all samples the same and run it through the filter. So yeah, you're right. You got to talk to the lab on it. I guess, how have you seen water permits evolve over the past 5 years? You kind of alluded to this at the beginning of like tracking around like emerging contaminants in the permit renewal cycle, the virtual records requests from regulators, but how have you seen them evolve and kind of where do you see them going?
Well, I mean, obviously the e-reporting has gotten to be huge. I mean, that's something that I thought would have come on a lot faster than it has, but it's not. I mean, some states were much further ahead of others with that, but obviously that's one big component. I think pretty much everybody is up and going with e-reporting now. Ironically enough, in some states, I've seen very little difference in permits over the past 3 or 4 years. That's been kind of surprising. We actually just got a couple that they were you could literally do the word by word, line by line comparison and see very little change. But that's not that typical, I mean, in that particular state maybe, but what we're seeing too is more and more like monitor and report constituents going into permits. And it's nothing necessarily specific to that particular facility or that industry, but it's because the states are trying to gather information, particularly around nutrients. So they're wanting to see, you know, you don't have a limit, but you have a monitor and report provision, and then they may take that information later to potentially develop a unit or develop a limit, or looking at, you know, the discharges to a certain receiving stream and what their contribution is of nutrients. So
yeah, on one hand, the scientist in me is like, great, we're getting more data, we're going to understand it, but you wonder what that'll be used for limit development, and does it on the risk side, now that you have samples collected, if we say this level is bad and you look back, even though it was pre-limit, what does that do to like a PR and messaging with around companies and facilities?
Yeah. Well, and the interesting thing about it too is there's a couple of the nutrients that have very short hold times. So I guess a big lookout on that is if there is an issue with your laboratory and they, you know, even though maybe it's the laboratory's fault, they missed the hold time or whatever, you can still get an NOV because even though you didn't have a permit violation, you didn't have a permit limit per se. But if for some reason you were not able to collect a sample that month or have a viable result that month because of a lab issue, you know, those monitor report constituents are still held in high regard, I guess is how I'd like to put that.
Yeah, I guess it's a good point that even though we think of limits and like exceeding limits as the most problematic, but just not collecting the sample is still going to be in a Clean Water Act violation, which is going to open up more liability on it. So.
Yeah, exactly. And I guess one other thing we've seen too is we've recently gotten a couple of draft permits, and they were the same. They were not they weren't pre-drafts sent to the permittee to review for correctness or accuracy. They were the same draft that was sent to EPA. So I guess that's one thing I would like to just tell people to kind of be on the lookout for is, you know, you may not get a pre-draft. You may get the same version that EPA gets. And in one case, there were some issues that it was just things that needed to be corrected, but still, that's just, I guess, maybe a lookout for folks. And one other thing I've seen is that even though we've had some turnovers in regulators, we've also had some folks that have just been really willing to, you know, they want the dialogue throughout the process. I've seen an increase in that. Just really want to talk through issues, talk to understanding things a little bit more. And I found that to be kind of refreshing to have those interactions. So
that's great. Yeah, because I think it's, I mean, we've talked about this with other folks too, is like, you want to have a two-way dialogue with regulators, because when stuff comes up, you don't want it to just be handing over like response letters and violation letters. Like, you want to have that dialogue early on in the process. So it's great that there's an increase in that. Is there anything in particular that they're wanting to do? Like, is there an area, like, is it around the sampling constituents? Is it around basic compliance? Is it around like understanding the process? Is there anything in particular that you're seeing those dialogues?
I think it's kind of all of those. I do know that EPA's, you know, the states are under a lot more scrutiny from EPA. And so when the states hit the you know, when the permit hits the pavement, they want it to be right. They want all the justification for any decisions they made in writing the permit to be very well defined, to be very clear. And this was a case, again, this was one that was before, it wasn't the issue with the EPA and the permittee getting the draft at the same time. This particular regulator was really wanting to make sure that every bit of information that he had to draft the draft permit was very clear and very well understood. So that was refreshing.
Yeah,
too.
that's awesome. That level of depth. Anything else on, like, you know, water related issues, whether it be the drinking water, stormwater, wastewater, that you're kind of like tracking closely in the industry? I mean,
Oh, yes.
Everything related to water, but is there any that, I mean, a lot of folks will say like PFAS is something that they track pretty closely. Electronic reporting is another one, like the virtual record request, electronic reporting, like the data demands that you need almost at an instant is another one. Is there anything for you that you really like track closely?
Well, yeah, I mean, obviously PFAS is a big one for everybody right now, and EPA is just shooting out more and more and more around PFAS, not just, you know, from a just in general, but also looking at it from, you know, land application of residuals and also in potentially developing effluent limit guidelines for certain industries and things like that. So there's a lot of activity around PFAS. I was actually on an emerging issues call for 4 hours yesterday, specifically around water related issues. And another one that's starting to come back around again is microplastics. There's, especially in, you know, Oregon and California, they're seeing a lot more activity there. Again, there yet is to be a well-developed or defined method for microplastics because there's a lot of challenges for that. But that's another one that we're really, really watching. Also, this whole Clean Water Act, the draft proposal or draft rule that's out there around the Clean Water Act and potential for having facilities to have a facility response plan independent of anything around SPCC. It's about hazardous substances, and if they're located within so close, you know, with so far, I guess, from a water body or conveyance, and have more than 10,000 times the RQ, the capability of having more than 10,000 times the RQ of any of the 296 hazardous constituents on site, then having to develop an FRP, and EPA having the having the jurisdiction to require them to have FRP regardless of whether they meet any of those criteria. So all those things are out. Those are out on the street right now, and there's the comment period on that one's been extended 60 days. So that will be the end of July. But I know several industry groups are commenting on that in the process of developing comments. Also, again, and then just water quality criteria, human health water quality criteria, and water body designations. There's a lot of activity around that right now in several states because they're going through their triennial reviews, and then how those translate into permits and permit limits. So that's just the tip of it. Tiny, but there's a lot. I said I want to lay down and take a nap when we want to talk about water on any kind of emerging issues call. It makes me tired. There's just too much going on.
The variety of it. I mean, looking at PFAS and sampling methods and analytical methods to microplastics to something kind of like what I would consider more basic compliance is like FRPs.
Yeah.
Basic compliance of like, okay, we need to write plans. It's not even into sampling. It's just the planning stage.
Yeah, the plans and how you're gonna and those plans aren't just plans. It's all the things that go into those plans and the training and the drills and
the execution of the plan then becomes
the execution of the plan. It doesn't just go on the shelf. So
yep, definitely. Well, we're at the end of our time. I really appreciate it, Diane. Thanks for jumping on for one of my favorite topics around stormwater. Yeah, a lot of stuff going on out there. It'll be interesting to see what happens with PFAS and the FRPs and stuff. But I appreciate you sharing kind of your knowledge on water programs.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate you having me, Ryan. I enjoyed it.
Cool. Thanks.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Take care, everyone. Bye.